Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This he taken?
Hey, Kiernan.
Hello, Ryan. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
You know, the weather's warming up. We got a new recording platform that we're trying out here. and a great guest. How could things be better?
You know, I feel like you and I are startup guys. If there's no podcast software that works,
I don't think I can claim that.
And everybody has a podcast. How are they doing it? You know, like that's the question. But we're trying out some new software today, so that's very exciting.
I mean, what was that? Wait, do you get sound effects on your side?
I do. I get sound effects on my side. It's like a 90s.
Oh, that's such a nightmare. Why don't I? What? Because I'm technically the guest. I don't get any sound effects.
They don't want to give you that power.
Do you have like wah 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 wah?
No, you can add all sorts of custom sound effects into the panel if you wanted, but it's limited.
We should go. we're not going to. We should go back to our Rick Steves episode and cut a whole bunch of sound effects of him. And then we could have him like he's on the show every week.
It's true. If he had like a couple good lines in there, we could just throw him in all the time.
Actually, an AI Rick Steves would be very helpful to us.
I'm sure he's developing that. You know, it's like have Rick.
I mean, that can't be too far behind. There's a pretty passable Biden out there.
You mean in the White House?
All right. Well, Ryan, very exciting show today. Now, I mentioned Rick Steves already. I like to think of this as, of course, we completed the quest for Rick Steves by having Rick Steves on the show, but that doesn't mean that we've explored the full ecosystem of Rick Steves living, you know, the lifestyle brand of Rick Steves.
That's true.
So today we have a very special guest, but I don't want to make it seem like he's only special for the fact that he's in Rick Steves' orbit. Now, I discovered him through a Rick Steves book. He's the co-author of a book, Italy for Food Lovers, with Rick Steves. But he himself, he's written a huge amount about Italian cuisine, Italian culture, and he's also an expert in opera. This is our guest, Fred Plotkin.
Fred Plotkin. So you're going to talk to Fred Plotkin today. I hope you talk to him about more than Rick Steves. What's it like to know Rick Steves?
No. I feel like he was very good about guiding me away from Rick Steves. Like, what does Rick smell like? He really didn't want to talk about certain things I wanted to know. And instead, we have a rich conversation about just all sorts of different regions of Italy, misperceptions about Italian cuisine. And he has lived an enormous amount of his life in Italy, even though he grew up in New York City. He's back in New York City now, but he is just an absolute expert, really dives a lot deeper than what you would expect most kind of guidebook writers to do. I mean, this guy lives and breathes and knows Italy. And in fact, Ryan, as we got like halfway through the interview, we were going on at such length that I thought it really makes sense to split this up into two different episodes. So today's going to be Fred Plotkin part 1, and then we'll have a follow-up next episode where we finish out with Fred, and when we're going to cover Rick, and we're going to cover Italy, and we'll even touch a little bit on opera.
So this is Fred Plotkin, episode 1. Okay, I'm into it.
Yeah, you know me, I like trilogies. So maybe if I cut it out in 3 in a particular way that works, I'll even stretch it out to that. But I don't think so. I think 2 feels right.
And what is your travel experience in Italy?
Only Rome. And
I'm only Milan.
Really? That's odd. Why only Milan?
Because I spoke at a conference there and they flew me out. So anybody wants to fly me to Italy, I'm there.
Good Lord. When was that?
Back when I was cool in our blue state days.
Yeah. I spent a week at the Vatican in Rome, and at the Vatican, I was there when I was in graduate school as sort of like an exchange. And so
you were working with John Paul, right? You were helping him with his marketing.
Listen, I wasn't in college at the same time you were, all right? Like John Paul, that guy,
Benedict?
that's so many popes back.
You were helping Benedict.
I was there when it was Francis.
You were there when it was Francis.
Of course, I haven't been out of grad school that long.
Oh, grad school. Okay.
And it was fantastic. We got to see a ton behind the scenes in the Vatican. We met with the equivalent of like the Secretary of State of the Vatican. And then I stayed on longer to be able to explore Rome. And that the travel series that I'm writing Secret Boston for, they have a secret Rome book that is fantastic. So, you do a couple days of the big stuff. And then, oh my God, I mean, Rome is just obviously endlessly packed with a lot of these secret little corners. Really, for Catholics like us, it kind of just creepy stuff all over the place, basements filled with bones, etc. And I desperately want to get back to do some broader exploration in Italy. Catherine really has her eye on a trip to Sicily. So I think that in the next few years, we'll probably take a quick trip over to Sicily.
There was some good wine in Sicily too.
Listen to Fred and you'll realize there's good wine everywhere and really good food. I particularly like, we talk about some of the northern regions that border Austria and Slovenia, and he talks about the kind of cross-cultural pollination there and how different the food is from what we conceive of as Italian food. I mean, Italy is a large place with a lot of food traditions that are very specific, even down town by town.
I would love to just explore Italy for a month, just kind of train around and eat.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you'll absolutely love the interview. It would really feel like an immersive experience, which, Ryan, you, of course, are kind of our resident expert here on immersive experiences. What are some of the immersive experiences you've gone to?
I've been to a lot of immersive experiences, from the classic Sleep No More to an Alice.
Oh, sure. I went to Sleep No More. Yeah. Very cool. And I got one of those like special things they do.
Oh, in the private room.
Yeah. Did you ever have that happen?
I did. Yeah. There's a lot of them. So it's impossible to like plan to do it. And it closed, right? It's finally done.
I do know it closed. Sad. Yeah. So Sleep No More was this big immersive experience, very popular in New York. It recently closed, but it ran for at least a decade, right?
Yeah, it was around for like a decade. Yeah.
Took over this huge building, and it was basically like a creepy version of Macbeth, that you could wander around and you could follow different characters, and everyone had to wear a mask and be silent. And in my like special experience, Ryan, this actress took me in a room by ourselves, and she took off my mask, which was really intense because you're like told you can never remove your mask.
Right. Everybody, all the guests, the audience, they wear these little like ghost masks. And so you walk around and you can't see anybody's faces unless they're actually in the show.
I mean,
that is very intimate.
And Sleep No More is like the gold standard for actual immersion, right, where like everything is very thought through, very well orchestrated.
Yeah, and then there was an immersive experience that really made the news in the last week. It's gone viral.
Hold on. Before we jump to that, you've also done, I remember there was a time you did 2 Alice in Wonderland ones back to back.
Yeah, I did a classy Alice in Wonderland one that was about Lewis Carroll's life, and he was a creep, let me tell you. And then I did, and then I did a Alice in Wonderland immersive cocktail experience that was run by the Mad Hatter. That was not as classy.
Was that the one that was on a bus?
It was on a bus, exactly.
Yeah.
for reasons beyond, I think they just had a bus. They were like, hey, we should put it on this double-decker bus. And so they turned the whole top of the bus into like a little cocktail room where the Mad Hatter gave a really non-equity performance.
The other thing I remember about your immersive, I feel like you went to a really bad dog-themed one, maybe?
It wasn't bad. It was super fun. It was a dog immersive experience where people could bring their dogs. This is in New York, folks, where people just have extra money to just burn. And so you take your dog doesn't care, by the way. Your dog doesn't care where it is most of the time.
Yeah, you got extra dogs to burn in New York.
Yeah, so you bring your dog to this immersive experience, and everything's like dog-centric. And I didn't have a dog, and so I was like this creepy guy walking around,
so weird,
like petting other people's dogs, and people don't like that in New York.
That is so weird, Ryan. Anyway, Okay, so we've established your credentials. You know immersive experiences, the good, the bad. And as you say, there's one that's recently been in the news. It's been talked about a lot, but only because of your passion for immersive experiences did I think we had to spend a couple minutes on it.
Yeah, so this is an unauthorized Willy Wonka immersive experience that happened for what I can only think was a couple days, maybe even one day, in Glasgow, Scotland. And it seems like a real nightmare. People paid like $45 to go, and it was in like a big garage, and they had printed out all these like things and put them on the walls, and really lo-fi immersive experience. And people called the police. It was so bad, and they shut it down.
I mean, and the pictures of it, I mean, it's like a weird little printed rainbow, like, and it's mostly a big empty warehouse. There's like a couple of props of kind of like candy cane, gumdrop sort of structures. But by and large, it's nothing is what I would describe it. And I think it was the equivalent of about $44 to get in.
And so apparently what happened is they advertised this thing with all these gorgeous like fake AI graphics that made it look amazing. And I read an interview with the guy who played Willy Wonka. Did you read about this guy?
No, I didn't.
So he said that he got the script. It was 15 typed pages of quote unquote AI gibberish that they asked him to memorize. And he said it made no sense at all.
Wait, Ryan, were you involved in this?
No, I wasn't involved.
I know you're starting to peddle AI on the side, if I'm not mistaken.
He gets this script, and in the script that the AI wrote, they invented a new character called the Unknown. And the Unknown is like a spooky,
which like hides in the walls,
the walls and comes out, and it doesn't really it's not really part of the Wonka universe. The Unknown. And there's a lot of stuff you can do in the Wonka universe.
I mean, for what I kind of like it. I don't know. I mean, the Oompa Loompas live in the walls. It kind of makes sense there'd be some predator in the walls as well. Yeah.
So there was this character called the Unknown. And
actually, Predator in the Walls. Is that the name of your other podcast?
Very funny. So we'll post some links to some various write-ups of this and so folks can see. It was very funny. And having been to Glasgow, it might not have been the worst thing you could have done that day.
Ryan, now I do have a question. You sent me a TikTok of the person who played the Unknown.
Yes, she unmasked herself on TikTok a couple days ago, and she's a lovely young woman. And she said basically, like all the other actors, they responded to an ad and they did this thing, and they had no idea it would be a disaster, and then it would be a worldwide disaster sensation.
I mean, it really had all the makings of something you would be involved with, Ryan. I just was reading down the article, waiting to see, produced by Ryan James.
The theatrical productions of mine were all of the highest caliber, folks.
I do have to say, the thing that frustrates me is I actually think a true, very good immersive experience of Willy Wonka is a great idea.
Yeah, you'd have to have Disney or whoever owns the rights.
You'd have to have a lot of money. Yeah. You'd have to have a lot of money. But you're thinking, Chocolate River. You could do the like ramshackle house that Charlie grows up in with the one bed for the 4 grandparents. You could do a magnificent chocolate shop where you could get a Wonka bar.
You could have Timothy Chalamet just kind of like hanging out, like
ruining the myth. I did not see it. I'm sure I will watch that on a plane at some point. Have you seen it?
I did see it. Yeah.
And how was it?
It's fine.
Is it bad?
It's not bad, but it's certainly not good. It's like a C minus. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anytime they come back to Willy Wonka these days, it doesn't work. It's Gene Wilder only.
They took away all
that Johnny Depp one was just horrible.
This is more in the Johnny Depp universe, and it takes away all the weirdness of Willy Wonka. Like, you don't actually understand how Timothy Chalamet becomes Gene Wilder. Like, there's no possible way.
I just think he's a very strange choice. He's not odd enough to be Willy Wonka, period.
Oh, but he's so good in Dune 2, folks. Check out Dune 2.
Yeah, if you want to see a great Willy Wonka prequel, go to Dune 2. All right, Ryan. Well, enough of that. I think it's time that we should get to our immersive experience, our audio immersive experience. That's a good tagline. Out of Office, a travel podcast and audio immersive experience. This week with our very special guest, Fred Plotkin.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
If Fred Plotkin is two things, he's an expert on opera and an expert on Italy. His work spans television, radio, and literature as the author of, Fred, do I have it right, 6 books at this point, or is this the 7th?
11.
11? Oh, golly. All right. Hey, 6 books on Italy, I believe. Is that right?
Let's bring it up to 8.
All right. Well, 8 books on Italian cuisine alone. And Fred is
actually,
joining
8 books on Italy.
On Italy. Okay, got it. So it's 6 on Italian cuisine. Is that right?
This could be the 7th. I'm really not sure at this point.
Okay. All right. Well, a lot. We can leave it there.
Yeah.
And Fred is joining us here today to talk specifically about the latest, which is called Italy for Food Lovers, which he co-authored with frequent guest of Out of Office, Rick Steves. So let's just start out, as we were discussing there, tell me about your history as an author and the concept of this book specifically.
Well, I'm going to take it even further back. I was born in New York City, but somehow one of my earliest memories was a passion for Italy from my very youngest age. And we'd have to take an hour just to explore that. But let's assume that by 5, I already wanted to move to Italy and not be Italian, but learn everything I could about Italy. So there was that. I was a pretty good communicator, and I founded my junior high school newspaper, was on my high school paper, was a writer from the beginning. But my main career was and is opera. And so a lot of what I've done in terms of my education and my travel has related to work in opera. I'm not a singer. I do everything but sing or conduct. But I've worked in opera since 1972 when I was 16. And I decided that if you're going to learn opera, you have to live in Italy. You have to be fluent in Italian. So I went to the University of Bologna. They have what is the equivalent of Italy's Juilliard. And I was the first foreigner to study there. And Bologna, for many people, is the greatest food city in the world. It has magnificent food markets. I was always a good home cook. And in Bologna, in the markets, not from a school, I got my education about Italian food products, about the way Italians handle food, about seasonality, about all kinds of things that now are jargon that everyone uses. But when I was a student as a teenager in the 1970s, they didn't have that terminology, certainly not in English. And for the Italians, it was second nature. So I was very fortunate to learn this without being self-conscious about food. But when I came back to the States, my English by then was faulty. So I went to journalism school at Columbia University, doing a specialization in radio to reacquire my English and to find ways to find one word to express many things. That was a year. And then I went to work for the Metropolitan Opera. And this is, again, I'm making very short things of it. But while at the Met, I cooked dinner parties often for guests from foreign countries who were working at the opera, including Luciano Pavarotti, who was a friend of mine from Italy. And he said to me, your cooking is really just like my mother's, which is the highest compliment you can pay somebody in Italy. Yes. And the reason for that, in part, is that he grew up in Modena, which is 18 miles, 30 kilometers from Bologna. So there are similar kitchens, there are similar food traditions, and I'm a good cook. And so he said to me, you really should write a cookbook because I've never tasted Italian food like this in New York. And I said, I don't know anything about writing cookbooks. I barely read them. And he said, well, you have a journalism degree. And I said, yes, in radio. And he said, well, that doesn't matter. And I'm making long story short. I got a contract from Simon & Schuster. I wrote a pasta cookbook that was one of the first, if not the first, cookbook of Italian food written in English that described and divided Italy by regions. There were other books that were not food books, but this may have been the first. It was certainly among them. And it seems that my book, which was called The Authentic Pasta Book, influenced real food writers who were interested in seasonality, regionality, all the things that by then were second nature to me. And so while working in the Metropolitan Opera, I already was writing cookbooks. My vacations would be in Italy, and I'd come back and write for the New York Times, appear on National Public Radio talking about Italian food. And again, long story short, there were many people who knew the food Fred Plotkin who knew nothing of the opera Fred Plotkin. And there were many people who knew the opera Fred Plotkin who knew nothing of the food Fred Plotkin. And it's the same person. And I have moved back and forth between the two careers. I'm not what I would call a competitive food writer, which is to say that I would rather document history and not come up with the latest food trend, whatever that is, the latest ingredient, or follow the pack that if some magazine or newspaper declares a certain town to be the hot food destination, probably I was already there and am done with it, or if not done with it, absorbed it. And so my goal in Italy is to keep going where other people don't go, including Italians, and discover things that Italians don't know. Because put very simply, Italy has 20 regions, which are like American states. And if you are, say, from Parma or Naples or Bari, your food taste and your traditions and your language tend to reflect the town you're from. And all three are great. And all over Italy, you have these wonderful towns. But it's not that someone from Parma really knows the food of Bari or Naples and vice versa. I don't have prejudices that way. There are regions I love the food in, but I love the whole country. And I can travel and compare. And let's say I take an eggplant. I might look at how an eggplant is used in Sicily or Calabria or Parma or Milan or Liguria, wherever. And to me, it's all eggplant. It's not that I'm reflecting the traditions or the prejudices of one region or another. So I pursue my pleasure activism all over the country and continue to do this out of pleasure. Now, I will say one other thing that I think is crucial. It helps that I speak fluent Italian, because if you don't speak a language fluently, if you're going to write about the food and culture and history of a country, you're missing out on most things, and you're relying on other people to do faulty translations or Google Translate. None of that works. Just to give you one example, there's an ingredient called agretti. Agretti are different things in different regions. In Umbria, it's sort of a green grass or herb. In the Veneto, it's more of a stalk type vegetable. And if you don't know the difference, you don't know the difference. And there are many, many words like that. Malvasia as a grape, it's not just one grape. There are many Malvasia grapes throughout the country, and they produce different wines. And this level of detail is something that one could take many lifetimes to pursue, master, and remain up to date on. And someone has to do it, so that's me.
How did you first learn Italian, given that you went there straight for university? Did you study it as a child?
No, I spoke New York City Spanish. I learned some French in school. But when I went at 17 to Italy, I didn't speak Italian, but I just threw myself into the place and learned. I would love to say that I could quote Melina Mercouri in the film Never on Sunday when she says, I speak French and I speak English and I speak Greek and I speak Italian and I speak a little Spanish. And a man says to her, where did you learn all of those languages? And she says, in bed. In my case, it's in the kitchen and in the opera house.
And when you were describing the Authentic Pasta book, that you wrote that in the mid 80s, right?
I wrote that in 1984, 85, sort of. Yeah.
So that it's just so interesting because, as you say, I mean, such focus on regionality and fresh ingredients. These things weren't really part of the food culture. I mean, I feel like today it's almost been commercialized, or you take it for granted. Every restaurant's trying to claim some authentic ingredient, but that was pretty groundbreaking at that time.
And another thing, I adored my editor. Her name was Carol Lally. I was so lucky to have Carol as my first editor, but I didn't have any clout in terms of the title. But I would not have wanted the word authentic in it, because how do we know what authentic is? You know, if you were to ask me how Americans perceive Italian food, if you're an Italian American, you say, well, what my grandmother made is the authentic version of lasagna. Right. And my answer would be, I love your grandmother, but she didn't make the authentic version. She made her version. Right. And it may be terrific. There is no authentic version of almost anything. The word may be genuine or traditional or things like that may come closer. But why do we have to plump for authenticity when it's an elusive target? Why, let's just say it's good. And why do we think it's good?
For your other titles that focused on Italian cuisines, how did you approach, going even further past pastas, deeper into these regions?
Well, the answer is, I mean, originally when I wanted to write a book about my first cookbook, Luciano Pavarotti was from Emilia-Romagna, and Emilia-Romagna is a magnificent food region. And when I was approached to do a book, I said, I want to do a book about Emilia-Romagna. And I was asked in all seriousness by an editor, not Carol, is Emilia-Romagna your girlfriend? Because that's where we were then, that they didn't even know. They may have known Sicily and Tuscany and a couple of other, maybe the Veneto or Lombardy. They didn't know the 20 Italian regions, their names and what characterized them. And most Italian Americans I would meet, and I would ask them where they were from, they would say, I'm from Naples or I'm from Bari. Now, what that probably was, they were from Campania or they were from Puglia or Sicily. But they didn't know the details, and that's unfortunate. But that's how vague everything was back then. And frankly, and unfortunately, most Italian Americans I knew didn't speak Italian because, same in my family, we were not Italian. The immigrant languages were put aside, and my grandparents only spoke English so that we would become, quote, more American. Nowadays, thankfully, most immigrant families teach their home language as well as English so that it makes us a better country. We're more intelligent if we speak other languages. And it also means that we can conduct business better in the world. All kinds of reasons why being bilingual or trilingual is a virtue. But I decided, since I couldn't write about Emilia-Romagna, and then a woman who became a very dear friend of mine, Lynn Rosetto Casper, wrote a magnificent book called The Splendid Table about Emilia-Romagna. That region was covered, and she did it beautifully, so there was no point of my doing that. I continued to work in opera. I published a book called Opera 101, A Complete Guide to Learning and Loving Opera, which is actually my bestseller. And I wrote a book called Classical Music 101. I remained in music. But then a publisher said to me, you wrote this influential book about the regions of Italy, and authors are snapping up all the regions. They're snapping up Campania for Naples and Puglia and Tuscany and Veneto and so forth. And if you want one, you better grab it now. And I looked at the remaining regions that did not have books that I thought merited books, and I was down to two. Liguria, the Italian Riviera, and I wrote a book called Recipes in Paradise, Life and Food on the Italian Riviera. And then a few years later, Friuli Venezia Giulia, La Terra Fortunata, the splendid food and wine of Friuli Venezia Giulia. In between, I traveled all over the country for years while doing my opera work. And I wrote a book that became very famous called Italy for the Gourmet Traveler. And in it, I discussed food, heritage, and culture in 504 cities all over the country. And it was published at a time just before internet and digital books and so on. And it weighed in at 2.3 pounds and 724 pages and was designed, frankly, primarily for people who rented a car.
Mm-hmm.
And it became very popular with Europeans and Australians because they would go to Italy for an extended time. If they came from Europe, they would have their car and they'd keep the book in the car. Americans, with their weight limits flying from the States over to Europe or Canada, couldn't carry this heavy book apart. And people would ashamedly say, Fred, I love your book, but I hate to tell you, but I just tore out the Marche pages and the Veneto pages because I went to Marche and Veneto, but I bought another copy. So that book sold very well, frankly, because people had
double the sales.
They had one for home for the bookshelf and the other to tear pages out of and take to Italy with them. I did 6 updatings of the book. At a certain point, it was taken over by a wonderful British publisher who marketed it all over the world, and it sold very, very well for a long time. And I was about to do a 7th edition when the publisher retired, and she retired sort of in February of 2020. Now, in February of 2020, Italy, northern Italy, was ravaged by the COVID pandemic even before it came to the U.S. And I happened to be in London in March of 2020 working at the opera, and that's when the pandemic hit Britain and the States. And I met with my new publisher there, and she said, well, we'd love to do Italy for the Gourmet Traveler, but you're not going to Italy right now. No one's going to Italy right now because it's blocked. And if you would have to update your book, it would take you a year. We don't know where we will be in a year. And so let's just wait and see. And so Italy for the Gourmet Traveler was put on the shelf. And then I got a call in, I think, May of 2020 from my friend Rick Steves. And that's what led to the book that we're talking about today.
When you are preparing, let's go back to when you first were working on creating Italy for the Gourmet Traveler, the first edition. What does that research process look like? I mean, given that you were in Italy for such a large span, but of course, I assume it's a lot of on the ground, a lot of eating. Is it interviews? Is it research into the history?
I did it on the history. I kind of knew, and I kept deepening. But I visited and sampled every single thing that I described.
Wow.
I went to every vineyard that I wrote about. I walked into every shop that I included because it was not a restaurant guide only. It was really a book saying that if you go to Alba, these are the specialties in Alba, and here are places that I think are good examples of the specialties. I never said this is the best version of whatever because there's no best. Can't say that. If people say to me, what's the best restaurant in New York City for Italian food? I don't know, because I would have to eat in all of them multiple times before I could form an opinion. And if I'm recognized, I get treated differently than if I'm not recognized. Now, the advantage for me in Italy at the time, there was not yet the internet where people could look up my name and match it with my face and find clippings and articles and so on. So I could walk into a restaurant in any town or trattoria or knife store or cooking school and say buongiorno and speak to them in Italian. And then they would say to me, well, how come you speak such good Italian? My answer, and it was truthful, was, I work in opera. Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Mm-hmm. So they never knew that I was actually talking to them as something of an expert about the culinary side of things because I work in opera. And they say, you came to Italy to study opera? Yes. And I learned Italian here. Wonderful. And so typically we'd start talking about Rossini or Puccini or Verdi. And then I'd say, so tell me about this mushroom dish you're making. And the food aspect would come in joined to the opera. And I mentally took notes and I would say, well, you know, this is terrific. Do you mind if I take a picture? I had a real SLR camera at the time. And because I'd love to learn this. And tell me, have you been doing this for a long time? Yeah. Because don't forget, I am trained in journalism and know how to do interviewing. So, but I was able to do it in a way, not where I was dishonest, but I just didn't say I'm writing a book. So there was one case, and I'm going to respect this man's privacy, where when I went into his store, I didn't know that his wife had just died. I didn't know that he was having financial troubles. I didn't know that he had 2 small kids that he had to take care of and raise on his own. He was incredibly generous with his time, and I wrote a very fine write-up about this man and his work and his dedication to cheese and the knowledge I learned, and how I recommend that if you're in the town that he was in, that you go in and pay some money and buy some cheese and have him talk to you about the cheese, and you'll learn a lot. Now, I didn't know anything about his background, but apparently it went from having him in financial distress to making enough money to put his children through college.
Wow.
And I was very happy to do that. And from what I understand now, he's retired, and the kids are not running the store because one became a doctor, the other a lawyer. But his brother and the brother's children are running the store. So the store is still there. And the tradition continues, the knowledge continues, the passion for excellence continues. And I made someone's life better inadvertently, and all of that is good. But the point is, nowadays, because I'm recognized in the food world more, but not too much, there are people who would know me. I'm a little famous in that regard. But so what I tend to do is I tend now to go to places that are even further afield. And I'll just walk into a place and I follow my nose, I follow my eyes. And if something reaches out to me sensorially, I'll go in and I'll eat and I'll start asking questions and be friendly. And Italians are very courteous and always make time for you. And so it might be that I'm walking into a place in a little town where no one has ever spoken to them about their food ways. And that's my honor to do that. And in my 2 regional books about Liguria and about Friuli, Venezia, Giulia, I made a point of documenting, as I did in Italy for the Gourmet Traveler, the traditions and the history, speaking mostly to very old people, because once these generations pass, that knowledge is gone. And if you live with your traditions, you don't recognize what makes them special and unique. You just live with them. But I felt it was my job to document why these were special. Liguria always, I think, historically was the region that appealed to me most aesthetically. It has wonderful food. The people are a bit quirky, but I like them very much for their quirkiness. Friuli, Venezia, Giulia, I discovered because when I was living in Bologna, my birthday is in May. And for my 20th birthday, I decided to go to Venice and spend my birthday in Venice. 3 days before, there was a terrible earthquake in an area of Friuli, the northwestern part of the region. And I decided that I should go up there and help. Because 10 years before that, Americans living in Florence helped clean up the mud from the paintings and the works of art after the Arno River flooded. And I decided they were called Angeli di Fango, in other words, mud angels. And I would be an Angelo di Terremoto, an earthquake angel, and go up. And I volunteered for a month helping to clean up a town that had been destroyed. And the people were so incredibly hospitable, even though they had nothing, that they were what I called hyper hospitable. They'd never seen someone like this before who just showed up and said, let me roll up my sleeves and help. The Friulians have what they call mal di mattone, which translates as brick sickness. In other words, if something breaks, you have to build it right away. But they were also broken spiritually. Nearly 1,000 people died, and aid was coming in, but it was hard to get to the worst affected zones. And I just found the people so wonderful that it became a part of my life.
Thank you so much for coming on. And now it's time for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan. Well, Well, thanks very much to Fred Plotkin. Part 1, Part 2 coming next week. But Ryan, I realized, God, we're here in the last stop, but I'm sorry to say we're going to have to shell segments here because we didn't do the Judy alert. I don't even know where you are. The Judy alert to let your mom, Judy, know where in the world you are. So please, before we formally head into the last stop, Ryan, where are you?
I'm in Medellin, Colombia.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
You've moved.
Just came in for a few days. You know, the thing about being in Colombia is you can go other places very easily in Colombia.
And how far travel is that?
It's an hour flight.
Oh, easy.
Super easy. Yeah. So I'm just here for a few days to hang out and enjoy the food and the scene and then back to Bogota.
Are you to the point where you have friend circles in each of these cities?
Not in Medellin, but I do in Bogota, obviously, but not in Medellin. So
was there anything specific that drew you back?
I just kind of wanted just a couple days away, and so I'm going on a big trip to Mexico for most of March. Yeah. So I figured I'd just do a little something small, and then the next time we speak, who knows where I'll be? I'll probably be in Mexico City.
And then you're going to continue to mosey north. Is that right? Or are you going back to Colombia and then back north?
I'll be in Colombia for a month. I'll be in Cartagena for a couple of days. And then I'm going to see, I'll be up in the U.S. I'm going to see you. I'm going to be in Boston. I'm going to be, we're going to go to Louisville. We've got a lot planned.
Digital nomad lifestyle here. Well, Ryan, we are here in the last stop. This is the last segment of the show, the final segment of the show. It's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment. It's popularly known as the People segment. And that's because it's where you and I each bring one thing that we want to share, that we want to open up, crack open, pass it around the circle, let everybody partake and enjoy. But it must fit one criterion. It can be anything. It can be a souvenir, a dream, an anecdote. It could be something you've listened to, something you've watched, something you've read. But it must inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So, Ryan, I'm going to ask you, as I ask you every week, do you have a last stop this week?
I do, Kiernan. Did you watch The West Wing, right? I obviously.
Do you know I've never watched The West Wing?
Oh,
I know. It's a huge gap. And I've never watched The Sopranos. Those are probably the two biggest gaps in my TV knowledge.
Well, The Sopranos holds up a lot better than The West Wing. So if you want to start there. But there's a great scene and I think it might even be in the pilot of The West Wing, where Toby, who's like the sort of rough communications director, is on a plane and he's making a phone call as they are taxiing. And the flight attendant says, you got to turn that phone off. It can interfere with the plane taking off. And he says, you know how dumb that sounds? And I feel like we've all had that sort of thought.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So article today, a couple days ago in Quartz, which I sometimes read, basically saying that airplane mode is a myth. It hasn't been a thing, at least in 20 years since they installed these things called picocells in the planes. But essentially, they keep around the airplane mode and the turn off your phones because they're worried people will take calls from the sky. And it'll lead to more incidents of air rage. But there's really no chance that your cell phone would ever negatively impact the plane.
I mean, doesn't everyone have air rage just for being on a commercial airline?
Right, but they say they think it'll make it even worse. I mean, can you imagine, Kiernan, if you and I were on a plane and I'm sitting there next to you and I'm on a conference call and I'm doing my conference call voice? Like, that would be a nightmare. So I think they want to prevent it from,
It would be pretty rough. I've experienced your client-facing voice, and while it is slick, it's all snake oil.
No, my client-facing voice, you don't want to hear that because you would turn it into the Amtrak between DC and New York, which is like the call center.
Yeah, that's why I go on. I always sit on the quiet car.
Well, some of us have to. Some of us has to work.
I really enforce it. I'm the enforcer.
You are. People there are really intense in the quiet call.
You bet I am. That's me. I'm the intense one. Absolutely. Yes. Well, it's funny that you say this because I just recently read an article that was defending turning off the phones and was standing by that it could potentially, in rare circumstances, mess with the navigational systems of the airplane.
It seems like that's not even the FAA's position anymore.
No. Yeah. That's fascinating. Now, do you turn on airplane mode?
Officially, yes, of course. Unofficially, no. I'm on the internet until it stops working because I'm too high in the air.
Okay. So this is where I am, which is I stay on the internet until it conks out. Then I put it on airplane mode because I'm like, why not? I might as well do what they say at this point.
I was on a flight with someone who saw me chatting and said, "You need to turn off your internet." And I was like, who are you, sir? I'm gonna have to sit next to you for 3 hours. You're policing my behavior,
That's it. So he was looking at your screen.
Yeah, I wasn't like talking or anything. I'm literally silently.
The things that man must have seen.
I'm literally just silently typing. I could have been chatting with an AI bot installed on my phone. He had no idea.
But he's like, why are you on Grindr on this plane? There's only so many people. Just look around.
Grindr on a plane. Yeah, it's not as good. Not as good. On a train, but not a plane.
No, bumpier on a train, though.
Kiernan, did you bring a last stop?
I did bring a last stop. Ryan, do you know I'm a big fan of the crooked media empire, Pod Save America, Pod Save the World. Are you not a fan?
You're the last fan. Oh, I can't.
No, they've got a vibrant progressive community over there. I don't think we as podcasters are in a place to criticize they who have a full-time podcast career. And I just want to recommend, so I listen to Pod Save the World, which, it's uneven, I would say. It's hosted by Ben Rhodes and Tommy Vitor. And Tommy Vitor, I don't really like very much. But
Ben's like they're all bright. But Ben is like the most serious of the dudes.
Tommy, he was like a communications guy. So like, Ben Rhodes, right. He was like really in the policy. I mean, he was a much more senior advisor in the White House to Obama. Yeah. And so I like and recommend listening primarily for Ben Rhodes' analysis. And there was an episode I specifically want to recommend that was just in the past couple of weeks called. This is not what I like about the episode, even though I do like it. The title is CPAC doubles down on creepy autocrats, which But what we
have done so good with our conservative audience, and now
I know.
Undo years of work.
No, this is just the title of that episode. But what I like is there's an interview on the back end of the episode with a woman named Wei New. And she's a human rights activist and a founder of a nonprofit Women's Peace Network, where she talks about the emerging civil war in Myanmar. And this is where Pod Save the World really shines, where there are a few areas of the world that they really keep up with. And Ben Rhodes has a really personal feeling and connection to several things he worked on in the White House. Opening up Cuba is one, so they're very active talking about Cuba policy. But Myanmar, he's very much in touch with progressive organizers in Myanmar. He's traveled there. He traveled there while in the White House. And, I just feel like, this is one of those places that I've talked about a lot. I was lucky enough to get to Myanmar during that brief period where folks could visit. I absolutely loved it. One of the most transformative travel experiences I've personally had. And to follow this society kind of reclosing, another military coup, discrimination against the Rohingya. There's a lot of turmoil there, and this is a very substantive look into that. So I just thought give it a shout. Pod Save the World, and this interview that Ben Rhodes conducts with Wei New.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I might tune into that. I do love my foreign policy. Well, Kiernan, what are we going to talk about next week?
So next week, we're going to have part 2 of Fred Plotkin's interview and chat. We'll talk a bit more about opera, and we'll dive in even more about Italian cuisine. Specifically, I really wanted to talk about what is the difference between this like romanticized perception that we have of Italian cuisine and the on-the-ground reality of what it takes to make this delicious food and how it differs region to region. The one thing I would plug, and we talked about this a little bit in the interview, is I can't tell you how much I recommend this book. Italy for food lovers. It's almost like a textbook level guide, but it doesn't weigh 30 pounds. I mean, it's very tight, it's very well written, and it's everything you need to know to be a braver food explorer all around Italy.
I could gain 30 pounds if I traveled around Italy pretty easily.
I do not doubt that.
You know what? I actually just went to an opera last week. Yeah, I went.
What'd you go to?
Casi fan tutti, the Mozart opera. And I saw it at the Teatro Mayor here in Bogota, and it was absolutely lovely. It was long, but it was lovely.
Sung in Spanish?
No, super titled. Super titled in Spanish, but it's Italian.
So you didn't understand any of it.
I understood more and, some other, things like that, but it was not a complicated plot, but
sure. Well, that is one of the good things about opera is that you can understand it solely through the musicality. Exactly.
And they sounded fantastic. So yeah, maybe I could get into opera in my middle age.
Yeah, no. Well, Colombia is the obvious place to do that.
Absolutely. Well, until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And
that's my opera.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
Is seat taken? Give me one. Is there one more? No, we could use that a lot more, actually.